Hi, I'm Riley, and I'm the Communications Director for Plan to Eat.
And I'm Roni. I am the Customer Experience Director and the lead content creator for Plan to Eat. And today we are just going to have a little chat about some of the things that our mom taught us about cooking and in the kitchen in honor of Mother's Day this year.
So my mom told me this past weekend when I saw her that her mom didn't really teach her how to cook. Like, she didn't really invite her into the kitchen. And I don't think it's because she didn't want her to learn. I think it's because they had a really tiny kitchen and there was not a lot of space for more than one person. So.
Yeah, my mom also didn't really learn how to cook from her mom, from my grandmother on her side, mostly because my mom was one of 5. And so I think for my grandma, it was just about, like, what can I get on the table as, like, she wasn't really much of, like, a grand cook. It was more just about, like, feeding the family, getting food on the table, and that was that. My mom actually learned to cook from my dad's mom and my great aunt. So, like, on my dad's side of the family. So it wasn't really until my mom and dad got together that my mom started to, like, learn some of the tips and tricks and, like, how to become a good cook from those 2 ladies. So
yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. And so then I think that was one of the things that in my life, my mom encouraged me to help her in the kitchen and cook with her because she wanted me to have an experience growing up of, like, learning how to cook and, you know, teach me things while I was younger rather than like leaving me on my own.
Yeah, that was my experience too. I feel like my mom really wanted us to cook, and maybe that was so she could have a break. If, like, because I'm one of 4, you know, if you know how to cook, then I don't have to cook, and so you can cook for me.
Right.
I'm not assuming that was it, but maybe.
Yeah.
But she was really inviting. Like, she wanted us to help her cook, make cookies. I remember making lots of cookies as a kid, or just helping with dinner in some way, chopping something up when I was old enough to use a knife, or mashing the potatoes or stirring something. I remember doing that a lot.
Yeah.
Which really made me interested in the kitchen.
Right.
And, like, wanting to, like, cook and learn how to make stuff because I was very welcome there.
Yeah. I was a little bit of a picky eater as a kid. I'm not a picky eater now, which is, I guess, kind of surprising. But as a kid, I was a little bit of a picky eater. I was always worried that everything was going to be too spicy or, like, too something. And so I think my mom bringing me into the kitchen was kind of a way to show me, like, here's the things that are actually going into the recipe. Like, you don't need to be, like, afraid or whatever that we're eating, you know, like, if you helped make it, like, maybe you'll be more eager to try it and eat it.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. That's a really good tactic.
Yeah. I mean, at least I think that's what she was doing. Because it was definitely, I was definitely, like, I was afraid of food being spicy. Like, what is that about being a little kid that you're, like, afraid of things? Like, there's nothing to be afraid of. But.
Probably because you ate one spicy thing and then forever you were, like,
and
scared.
I didn't like
that
the feeling of that.
Yeah, it was going to react to you some way.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's true for a lot of people. I think that my mom was never afraid of using spices. And so just, like, very flavorful food was really normal in our house, or, like, new flavors, because my mom is one of those very adventurous cooks, and she would try new recipes all the time. And so I was never afraid of spices, I think, because we ate so many of them, but that also makes me feel like, in comparison to, like, people I know, sometimes I think I use a lot of spices.
Oh, sure.
We have a very full spice cabinet.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that I learned from her, is, like, just not being afraid of adding a lot of seasonings to make food really flavorful.
Yeah.
Or adding that crushed red pepper when something is kind of bland. You don't have to add a ton. It's not going to make it super spicy, but just adding a little bit to give it some interest, just, like, taste exciting umami or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, and now I really like spicy food, and that's something that my mom and I both share now, is that, like, we both love, like, a really spicy green chili or something. Like, going to a restaurant, that's, like, something that we always look for. So it's interesting, like, how that's changed, but that's something, like, my mom probably hated when I was a kid. Like, I can't put any spices in any of the foods that we eat. She really likes spicy food.
Here's the hot sauce.
Yeah.
Okay. My mom's taught me some really practical things, like, if your soup is too greasy, you can add lettuce leaves to it. It'll absorb some of that grease out. Or if it's too salty, like, if soups in particular, if your soup is too spicy, if your soup is too salty, you can add raw potatoes. It'll absorb some of that salt. Or if your soup is too greasy, you can add lettuce leaves, and you just pull them out before you serve it, but it will absorb some of those extra things you don't really want.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
My mom is, like, the tip queen, I feel like. Another thing she taught me is, like, if your brown sugar is hard, you can add, or if your cookies are hard, you can add a piece of bread.
Oh.
And it'll, like, the moisture from the bread will re-moisten your brown sugar or your cookies so that they're not as dry.
Oh, yeah.
Little things like that are so helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I worked at a restaurant for quite a few years before I started working for Plan to Eat, and we had these like little brown sugar containers that you could like take to people's tables. And the larger container of brown sugar, we had this like disc. It was made out of it was like a ceramic disc, like the same type of material that you get like a plant pot from. It's like that like brown terracotta kind of. And you like soak it in water, and then you can put it in your brown sugar and leave it in it, and it would keeps it from going stale or hard or whatever. And like it's like specifically made for that purpose.
Wow, that's really cool. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
The bread trick works, but that sounds like a tool that like made
so like if you have a lot of brown sugar and it's always going hard, you could buy one of these terracotta thingies.
Ours probably like mine gets hard because I use it so rarely. So it's not like I'm like going through bags and bags of brown sugar.
Right,
it's just like oh I need it for this or I need it for that, and it's hard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I think the other day, actually, I made some, like, chicken and rice, and I was like, I don't know, like, what to go with this. And so, like, the chicken, I had roasted the whole chicken, and then I had some, like, the drippings and stuff over. So I was like, cool, I'm going to make some gravy to, like, kind of, like, add some extra something to this meal. And so I, like, started to make the white sauce for the gravy, and I added, like, way too much flour. And I was like... It was like one of those moments where I like called my mom and I was like, Mom, my white sauce is like so thick and like I can't get it to be creamy. And she's like, well, you added way too much flour to it. And she's like, all you have to do is like add some more butter so that it makes a little bit like looser thing. And so like we ended up with so much gravy in the end. But you know, it was like mom to the rescue because I was able to call her and be like, what did I do wrong?
Yeah. Mom to the rescue is like the phrase of my life. Sometimes like I call her for how do I make this? Because I grew up in a family with minimal, like my mom likes to try recipes, but once she's made it, she doesn't need a recipe again.
Yeah.
Or she has a recipe and she does so many extra things to it that it's not really the recipe anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's how I cook though now, is that I just like make stuff, or I know a general idea of how it gets made and then I just add things until it gets where I want it to be.
Right.
But I have to call her sometimes, hey, this doesn't taste like yours. How do I make it taste like yours? Yeah, and so I call her and tell me how to make this. Thankfully, my mom does use Plan to Eat also, and so we share recipes through the Friends feature, which is super nice. But there are still some that are like more family recipes that aren't added because they are more add some of this and some of that and some of this, and then mix
just
it
like
together.
Intuitive.
And so that can be a challenge if you have no idea how to cook that way. But since I was kind of taught to cook that way, then it's helpful because she can just say, well, add a little bit more of this, or if it doesn't taste right, add a little bit more of this, which is like my mom's key thing. Is like, just keep adding until.
Yeah.
Which can do the same thing as your sauce or your gravy.
Right.
Suddenly you have way more than you wanted, but you got it right. The taste was right.
Yeah. I actually saw a recipe book the other day online it was something about like the not recipe book or something like that. And it's like every recipe in the recipe book is just a list of ingredients with no real amounts.
Oh.
And so it was like, chicken breasts and paprika and garlic and so it's like there's the instructions obviously of like what to do to make the recipe, but it was kind of like the idea about this whole like intuitive cooking situation where you just like buy some ingredients and then make a recipe and you add the things to make it taste the way you want it to taste. Like
that's
it's kind of
fun.
It's kind of a really cool idea.
Yeah.
I'd never seen a recipe book do that before. And it's like, that's definitely really intimidating to some people.
Absolutely.
Like even as like somebody who cooks all the time, it's a little intimidating to be like, well, do I want 2 chicken breasts? Do I want 5 chicken breasts?
Absolutely.
Do I need a whole tablespoon of paprika? Like, what are we looking for here?
I think that's another, like, kind of this idea of, like, it could go either way, like, good or bad.
Yeah.
I think that's something that my mom really taught me is, like, it could not be good. And you are not a failure because it wasn't good. One, you might just need to keep adding stuff until it tastes good or tastes how you like it. But also, if you cooked something and it wasn't good, you learned something.
Yeah.
And you learned that you don't like those flavor combinations, or you added too much something and it was way too spicy and not enough like good flavor.
Yeah.
The spice overwhelmed it or something, but ultimately you learned something, so the next time you make something, it's going to be better.
Yeah. My mom's really similar, and she even tells me that she's still experimenting in the kitchen and trying to figure out the things that she likes or how much of certain things to add. So like there's a lot of times when I'll call her and be like, how do you make it this way? And she's like, I don't know. I just do it until it tastes right. And so it's like, it's always kind of this like experimental process with the way that she cooks. And sounds pretty similar to your mom, where like she doesn't very often use like a full recipe. She might look at a recipe to be like, oh yeah, I remember I need these things. And then she just kind of like does it either from memory, by taste. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I like that. That's great. Shout out to all the moms out there and dads who taught your kids how to cook or who were horrible cooks that made your kids want to be better cooks. Like, you guys are rock stars.
Yeah.
No matter what you did.
So one other thing that my mom always talks about that was really important in me learning how to cook well was just learning how to actually read a recipe.
So helpful.
And so like one of the things she always says is she's like, before you start cooking, make sure you read the whole recipe. Make sure you actually have all the ingredients. Make sure you know how to do some of the things, because like when it comes to like something like gravy, or like you're making like a roux or a white sauce, and like you have to be whisking the whole time like while it's happening.
Yeah.
And so like if you're trying to that's not something you multitask with very easily, or if you don't actually know like how to do that and you already have, you know, like your butter melted, but then you don't really know what the next step, and like you don't know like what does this term mean to like do this next step, and then you have to like look that up while you're in the middle of the process. Like she has always said, like it's so important if you're actually cooking with a recipe to read the whole recipe beforehand, make sure you have all the ingredients, even just like set them all out, do your like mise en place situation where you set all your things out. And because she said that's, you know, that was a place when she was learning how to cook that she always, it was something that she struggled with, because she wanted to just be able to start cooking and just do things as she was going, because she's that kind of like multitasking person. And she was like, learned really quickly, like always read the recipe, always do some things beforehand that you know you can. Like,
I've seriously gotten myself into some trouble with recipes because I didn't read ahead, or I didn't look at the time or how long it would take.
Oh, yeah.
Learned my lesson on that one, because now I'm like, oh, this has to cook for 7 hours. Or, okay, even 45 minutes. I'd be like, what? 45 minutes? But that same thing where you're doing something, but this other part of the recipe requires attention.
Yeah.
And you're having it. Yeah. And if you're not careful, you'll get overwhelmed with all the processes. And so that's really a great tip from your mom to like read the recipe first.
You're making like a main recipe and you want to make a side with it, and you're like, well, the main recipe is cooking. That's when I'll prepare the side. But then the main recipe is done in like 15 minutes. You're like, I never actually made the rice.
And it's like 20 minutes. Yeah. I hate when you make a recipe and you get to the end and like everything is done at different times, because I like to eat hot food.
Right. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Another thing you made me think of is that my mom always taught me that recipe books often have a substitutions list in them, or a directory of cooking methods and terms and stuff like that. So if you're reading a recipe out of a cookbook, which I know is a little bit antiquated, but if you're reading a recipe out of a recipe book, often you can find, flip to the front or flip to the back, and there's a list of terms that will tell you how to do something in the recipe, or you're in the middle of a recipe because you didn't read it ahead of time and you realize you don't have an ingredient that it calls for. You can go to a substitutions list. You can also Google this, but you can go to a substitutions list and see, okay, I don't have any butter. Oh, buttermilk. That's a better one. I don't have any buttermilk. I can make buttermilk by mixing regular milk and white vinegar together. So then your recipe isn't just done because you didn't have like a big ingredient to make it perfect, but you can have a substitution that works just as good as the original. Yeah. Do you cook a lot of recipes that your mom made now, or do you just use her influence? Because sometimes I make recipes that are family favorites, and I have a family favorites cookbook that my mom gave me. But I find myself, I cook a lot differently than my mom does. Although she taught me pretty much everything I know, I definitely have kind of made my own way in cooking. What do you find?
Yeah, I think that it's a little of both. Like, we grew up eating a lot of like hearty, savory meals. And like, while I love those, like those aren't something that I eat like every single night. Yeah. We also grew up eating like quick things. Like when my mom wasn't wanting to cook, we'd eat quick things like Hamburger Helper or something. But she also made like a lot of casseroles because I have 2 older brothers. And so it was like to feed 2 growing boys, she like needed a large hunk of food so that they could just, gorge themselves. But so I would say it's like a little of both, like I love to have like pot roast and things like that. And like, that's very much stuff that my mom is like really good at cooking and like making good stuff like that. But then there's a lot of other stuff. Like, I don't think that my mom eats tacos as much as I eat tacos, or things like that. So, there's some similarities and some not similarities. It was like in our video in January, we were talking about lasagna.
Oh, yeah.
I don't really make lasagna because I didn't grow up making it. So like there are definitely things that I don't eat because I didn't really grow up eating them.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm the same way. I have found that if my mom didn't like something, I'd never ate it as a child.
Right.
And now, as an adult, I've tried some things. I'm like, oh, I actually do like that. Why did
yeah.
I never eat that? It's because my mom never cooked it,
Right.
Which is fine. Everyone has their preferences. My kid, well, there'll be things that she never eats because I don't like them. Beets.
Right.
But, yeah, it's interesting. Because I think I grew up in the South, so while my mom was a really good and like healthy cook, we definitely ate some more Southern comfort food type things. And I rarely make those now.
Yeah.
Which they still are very, like my memory of those foods is very warm and comforting, and like I love those things. I just don't cook them as much now. And we tend to eat a little bit more seasonally than I remember doing as a kid, even though produce is so plentiful in the South.
Oh, yeah.
And we definitely ate that way, but I think I try a little harder to do that now. So maybe it was more natural as a kid, and now I have to try to do it. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, there's definitely some recipes too that like my mom is like the master of that recipe.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, speaking of Southern food, I didn't grow up in the South, but my mom makes amazing fried chicken.
Oh.
And I have just never been able to make fried chicken the way that my mom makes it.
it's a skill.
It is
There
a
are
skill.
certain things that I think
Yeah.
are just really, people are really good at them, and sometimes I just can't get there.
Yeah, and so I mean, like, I'm always like begging my mom to make fried chicken, and she's like, "It's a lot of work."
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just one thing that I have tried multiple times to make it, and it just never tastes quite like my mom's, or I totally mess it up, and
Yeah, absolutely. Well, huge shout out to Leah.
And to Julie,
Thanks for being our moms. Happy Mother's Day.
thanks for teaching us how to cook.
Yeah. We'd love to hear what your mom taught you how to cook or didn't teach you how to cook in the comments.
Or if you're a mom and you're teaching
Yeah.
your kids how to cook something, let us know what you have enjoyed cooking with them.
Yeah, we love it.
Yeah.
Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, happy Mother's Day.
We love our moms, and we're excited to celebrate them and talking about all the things that they taught us.
Yeah.
Yeah, moms.
Yeah, Mom.